Good afternoon again, and welcome to the Allen Temple Public Ministries virtual town hall. Housing is a human right. I am Reverend Jeremy McCants. I serve as the Minister of Prophetic Justice at Allen Temple Baptist Church, as well as I serve as the co-chair of our public ministry alongside Dr. Allie Whitehurst. In her absence, we acknowledge her, and you will see a few members of our public ministry team are logged in today. Sister DJ Richardson, Sister Rochelle Buford, who will be monitoring the chat for us, and as well as Sister Iris, who is on. So we just thank you all for joining us for. There are a number of timely conversations given a lot of decisions that have been made on the federal level this week. So we understand that the conversations can definitely drift into a different arena. But we definitely want to focus today primarily on housing in Oakland and Alameda County. So today's virtual town hall will be more of us bringing you education and access to people who are leading the work around building affordable housing, projects that are going on over the next couple of years. We do not at this moment have a formal designated time for a Q&A, but we do encourage you, implore you, if you have any questions that do come up, to put them in the chat. Please put them in the chat, and we'll make sure to capture them as we move along. Give me one moment here. So yes, so we have a jam-packed agenda. As of right now, we are going to now open with a scripture and a word of prayer. We are a church, we are faith-based, and we always look to God to help lead us in moments like these. So please accept these words of scripture from John chapter 15, starting at verse 12, and I'll be reading from the New International Version. And these are the words of Jesus. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading, hearing, and most of all, carrying out of God's holy word. Let us pray together. Spirit of the living God, we thank you for this beautiful, beautiful Bay Area Saturday. God, we thank you for life, health, and strength. God, we thank you for each person, each testimony that is represented on this call, those who are trying to figure out how to make this world, this community, a better place. So God, we ask now that you be with each presenter, each speaker. God, allow them to bring their authentic selves to the space, allow them to speak truth to power, and allow those who are listening to receive it, to embody it, and to figure out how we can add to the solutions and not just continue naming the problems. So God, we ask now for courage, we ask for wisdom, and we ask for continued clarity. It is in the name of God, our Creator, in the name of Christ, our Emancipator, in the name of the Holy Spirit that comforts us even right now. In Jesus' name we do pray. Amen. 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 So I was intentional about that scripture because it's interesting that Jesus moves from calling the disciples servants to calling them friends. And so Bishop T.D. Jakes was talking about this a few Sundays back about how he dislikes the term servant leaders, because sometimes we can hide behind that. But in this space, those who are presenting, I want to open and give you free space to engage us as friends, right? Talk to us real, keep it real, and just engage us as friends. So our first presenter, we wanted to kick this off with kind of laying some education around the economic forecast, if you will, of what housing looks like in the Bay Area within Alameda County. So we have Ms. Maya Dillard Smith, who is going to come to us in her own way and give us kind of a background of the economics as she sees it, as she's been a part of the work. She is no stranger to Oakland. She's, give me one second here. So she was, of course, nothing wants to act right when you're doing something. But she is a public safety expert, a mother of three. She served as the senior advisor to the mayor and director of violence prevention for the city and county of San Francisco from 2007 to 2009. And she was the elected founding chairperson of the city of Oakland's violence prevention and public safety. So in all of that work, she still has profound advice and information around housing. So Ms. Maya Dillard Smith, the floor is yours, and feel free to introduce yourself again if need be.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me on today. Oakland is home. I am based now in Atlanta, but bi-coastal between the Bay Area, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. I'm a product of Oakland Public Schools. My family has been in Oakland since the late 1800s, and so we are proud 7th-generation Oaklanders. In addition to what Jeremy laid out in terms of my background, I'm also a civil and human rights attorney by training. I was recruited here to Georgia to lead the ACLU for the state of Georgia. We've just had some really critical elections here. And as Jeremy mentioned, there's so much going on in our orbit around issues that are impacting everyday folks. In addition to that, I was a founding member of the Oakland Community Land Trust. And as many of you may know, the Oakland Community Land Trust was responsible for the purchase of the home about 2 or 3 years ago, where the mothers took up residency in the home and was ultimately successful in purchasing that home from a national investment group and in order to keep that housing affordable. So I'm here with you all this afternoon just to provide some context to the national housing crisis and what Oakland is currently experiencing. In 2019, nearly 30% of all American households were housing cost burden. In the housing industry, there's a 30% rule. And that rule says that typically we as Americans should not spend more than 30% of our income on housing, but more than a third of us across this nation actually are. 1 in 7 households, that's nearly 17.5 million in total, were severely cost burdened, spending half or more of their income on housing. And that's pretty tremendous, especially as we all know the levels of inflation that we are dealing with post-pandemic. An average rent was 18.7% of the average monthly salary during the Great Depression. And a new house cost 225% of the average yearly salary. By comparison, in 2021, average rent was almost 30% of the average monthly income. And a new house was nearly 800% of the average yearly income. So those are pretty striking figures. In Oakland, where the median income is roughly $80,000, those median numbers are interesting when they're parsed down by particularly race, where, those of color tend to have less income. The per capita income in Oakland is roughly $46,000, and more than 15% of households live in poverty. As many of you are probably familiar, Oakland has its 17K plan, which proposes to increase funding policy and programs to protect 17,000 households and produce 17,000 total units for Oakland residents. But I caution us on that plan because in the earlier administration under Jerry Brown, he had a 10,000 K plan, which actually spurred much of the housing crisis locally that's experienced by residents. It attracted residents from around the Bay Area and transplants from out of state, as nearly every surface property in the city of Oakland, all of the parking lots that we once knew as children are now luxury apartments, and many of the native folks have been priced out. In addition to that, in January 2019, the point-in-time count reflected nearly a 50% increase in the number of homeless and unsheltered and undersheltered people in Oakland over a 2-year period, totaling more than 4,000 people. When you look at the numbers over the last 20 years, the Black population in Oakland has declined by more than 33%. And East Oaklanders experienced the greatest financial insecurity in the post-recovery period, as evidenced by an increase in households with new delinquencies on mortgages and other credit accounts. And that does not even begin to scratch the surface on evictions, though there have been a number of moratoriums put in place at the local and state level. Most recently, UPenn created a renter vulnerability index based on a number of indicators, including rent burden, and it found that the most vulnerable neighborhoods to rent instability were in East Oakland and parts of West Oakland. And, you know, interestingly, I've been engaged in the real estate development project at Mandela Parkway at the BART station. And so I'll leave you with this. That project is slated for 500 market rate units, which will be for purchase, but they will be luxury. And they also have 250 affordable units in that development. But I always like to leave people with the following questions. When you hear elected officials and housing advocates talk about affordable housing, they will often say we have 100 new units that we're developing and 20% of them are affordable. That means out of the 100 units, 20 of them are affordable, but we must all be critical and ask, affordable for who? Because under the HUD guidelines, many of the developers are doing affordable projects at 80% of what's called AMI, area median income. And when they do those projects, they're looking at an 80% area median income because it allows them to get tech employees and others who may qualify under those metrics for affordable units. What Oakland is desperately in lack of is deeply affordable units in the AMI area from 0 to 50%. And that question about affordable for who is very important. I'll give you another example. In West Oakland, if you have 80% AMI, you're looking at incomes in excess of nearly $120,000. And by virtue of the native and long-term residents who have been there, it's an automatic displacement strategy. And so the very people that live there who are advocating for housing may in fact be supporting projects that are automatically displacing them to start. And so I want to leave that with you all as you contemplate this conversation on today. And as efforts are undertaking to increase affordable housing, that each and every time you hear about an affordable housing project, you have to ask, affordable for who? I'll also say that depending on how the project is financed, there are tax credits that you can get at the local and state level, but there are also funds that you can receive from HUD. Many of those projects are time lapse, which means after a period of 20 to 30 years, they can automatically become market rate, or there can be a petition filed so that they become market rate. And so the protections on affordability traditionally have been in 20 and 30-year increments, and we need permanent affordability so that long-term and Indigenous folks are not displaced at the record rates that they have been over the past 10 to 15 years. Thank you all for having me on today.
Perfect. Thank you, Sister Maya. Just gonna drop the mic on us, huh? That's how you feeling today. Thank you for that information. Wow. Are there any questions? Actually, we can possibly take 1 to 2 questions. If you do have a question, please use the raise your hand feature. If you go to the action
in the chat.
You have some questions, Sis Rochelle? You want to?
We have questions in the chat. Let me just read out one of the questions that's in the chat.
Perfect.
Even if qualified applicants may be screened out even qualified income applicants could be screened out due to history of eviction. So they're just making a point that you could be qualified, but you could still get screened out and get evicted.
Very true. Very true. And post-pandemic, given the rate of eviction as people were displaced from jobs, those are real consequences and considerations for those who are in transition on housing, under-sheltered, and those trying to get into shelter. As many of you know, in the tent cities that exist in Oakland and across the Bay Area, many of the people living them are not unemployed. They are going to work each and every day. And the qualifications, I'll give you an example. I talked about the 30% rule, but most rental applications require not just that you don't have evictions or that you have a certain credit rating, they also require that you make 3 times the rent. And when average rents are exceeding $3,000 per month for a 2-bedroom, and in some cases a 1-bedroom, someone has to make close to $9,000. That's approaching $100,000 annual salary, which is completely out of reach for so many working Oaklanders and others throughout the Bay Area.
So there's another question that says, are there any low-income projects coming up? Low income is different from 30% affordable.
I'm sure there are lots of projects slated. And just to be clear, 30% affordable, I mentioned 2 30% metrics. One of them is the traditional rule that says on average, folks spend about 30% or should not be spending more than 30% of their monthly or annual income on housing. I also mentioned something called AMI, which is area median income. And when you get to an AMI of 30%, you're talking about deeply affordable at that point. You're talking considerably below the poverty rate. So there are deeply affordable. I'm aware of one project in particular, and that's the project that was recently groundbreaking in West Oakland that's being headed up by Elaine Brown. That project is deeply affordable. I think all of the units there are deeply affordable, but I would leave it to some of the city representatives to speak to the more specifics on that project and other projects that are slated through the development pipeline.
And then there's one final question, which is kind of what we talked about while we had this meeting with this town hall with public ministry, is what can be done to help Native Oaklanders keep and stay in their homes?
And thank you so much for asking that question, because it reminds me to speak about one very particular strategy that is often left out. And I have seen it absent in many of the City of Oakland strategies, which is, as a native Oaklander and longtime resident, we have legacy property throughout the city. And they are properties they're heiress properties that were inherited by my grandparents and great-grandparents. And we rent them out. And they are a source of income for my elderly parents who are retired. And so many of the strategies have focused on renters, and understandably so, but few of them has focused on how to keep homeowners, legacy homeowners, in their homes, or those people who maintain property for 30 and 40 and 50 years in the city of Oakland when there were not strong economic times and there was not high demand for housing. And very few of those strategies have focused on how to retain existing home ownership for long-term legacy and native residents. And that is a missing strategy that must be addressed by the city and housing advocates so that the ownership strategy is not lost as so much focus is put on renters, because it is actually home ownership that is the transfer of generational wealth. And we have to ensure at the same time that we're protecting renters, that we're also protecting elderly and native property owners who aren't like large scale rental developments that have 300, 400, 1,000 units in the city. We're talking about, 5 to 10 units that people are renting out, but that are a core source of their own retirement income and their generational wealth transfer. And so I think it's a very necessary strategy that I'd love the elected officials and city representatives to speak to you all in detail about on today. Thank you for asking that.
Awesome. Thank you, Sister Rochelle, for monitoring the chat. And thank you, Sister Maya, for answering. Absolutely. Thank you so much. So as a perfect segue, we are going to move into more of on the ground work that's being done in Alameda County and Oakland specifically. So our next three speakers will be Ms. Michelle Sterott. We will hear from the office of William Gilchrist and Ms. Shola Olatoye. First, we'll have Ms. Michelle Sterott, who serves as the housing director at Alameda County. So Ms. Michelle, I will toss it to you. And so this next session will, as I said, be specifically about what Alameda County is doing and then what Oakland is doing. So Ms. Michelle.
Good morning. Is there any way that I can share my screen? Can you allow me to do that? Because I have a PowerPoint.
Awesome. I will make you co-host.
Thank you.
Should have access.
All right. So thank you for having me. My name is Michelle Sterott, and I am the housing director for Alameda County's Housing and Community Development Department. And I'm really excited about the concept that your convocation is called Housing is a Human Right. It's actually our tagline. And that is, can you guys see my screen?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did it move? Did it
Yeah.
slide? Okay. All right. So housing is a human right is our tagline here at Alameda County's Housing and Community Development Department. And I believe that very strongly. It's a huge part of my mission in life. In 2021, Out of Reach, which is a national study that they do annually out of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, determined that there isn't a single county left in the entire United States where minimum wage can support a 2-bedroom apartment. And this is really critical because there used to be places where you can go and, work at a minimum wage job and afford to pay rent. And at this point in the United States, there isn't anything anywhere where one full-time job at minimum wage will support a house. And so this is critical in the sense that we are quickly seeing that housing is a commodity and it is an investment, and it is not something that we see as a right. It has become a privilege if you can afford it. And just a few weeks ago, I was at UC Berkeley talking with a group of students who were real estate students. They wanted to become real estate developers. And those eager, bright faces, we asked the question, is housing a human right or is housing an investment? And it was interesting because they all had gone through school and learned the concept that housing is something that you invest in and you make money off of. But as we did our presentation and talked through the issues that evolved because of basically a capitalistic society, what we're finding is, developers are actually, unless they go into it with the right perspective, they're actually causing some of the problem, as Ms. Smith just said. So, we're obviously in a place where the housing market in Oakland has become way too costly for most of our folks who live there. And so why is it that happening? The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is the nation's housing department, and it has been around for a very long time, since the 1930s. And I wanted to show you the disinvestment in housing. And this screen is really critical. So the bar graphs, the lines that are go up and down, they start in 1976, and then they go all the way up there till 2007. And these are in real dollars. So inflation is not part of this. This is just in actual dollars spent by the government on HUD. And so you can see that starting in about 1980, we saw a decline in the HUD budget, and it dropped quickly. There was a little bit of a spike in 1985, but for the most part, in 2007, we have less than half of what, maybe 45% of what the government spent in 1976 going into a housing investment for low-income folks. Now, the other part of this slide that's really, really critical is the gray part at the back. And you can see that gray part has done nothing but increase since the 1970s. And that represents the investment of the federal government on tax breaks for those folks who own their home and can take a mortgage interest deduction. So you can see that at this point in 2007, the investment of the government in mortgage interest deduction is fully 3 times what it is in our nation's housing department. And the housing department is there to actually invest in housing for low-income folks, whereas that mortgage interest deduction is there for anybody that can afford to buy a home, but basically those are the folks who have money. I wanted to also just very quickly show you, what does it look like at HUD since that last slide. This represents 2011 to 2018, and it shows the disinvestment of HUD from 2010. So 2010 is the black line. That's how much money they were spending in 2010. And you can see that every year since, it's been less than what they spent in 2010. So this has been a real systematic approach to not putting money into low-income housing. And I don't mean affordable housing. I mean just any kind of government-funded housing program. That disinvestment has real consequences. And California and the Bay Area are some of the highest cost areas in the nation. And what we see here is that, in California, more than 1.5 million households are severely cost burdened. And Ms. Smith was just talking about, spending 30% of your actual income in housing is what people should spend. Like that's the appropriate rate. That would be great if everybody could just spend not more than that. But those 1.6 million renter households on this slide, they are severely cost burdened. And that essentially means that they're spending more than half of their income on housing. And that's eating into the money that they would spend on transportation, on childcare, on healthcare. And so these are really critical problems, right? And then the next impact is when you're spending more than half of your income on rent, you are at risk of homelessness. And California has more than 27% of the nation's homeless population. So what you can really see is this direct correlation between being cost burdened and then ending up homeless. So what can local government do? Mostly we spend money that HUD gives us. So when HUD spends money, they give it down to local governments in the form of either the housing authority or the local city or the county. And we take those funds and we spend them in the community. But we can do more than that. And in 2016, Alameda County residents voted for Measure A1. And so Measure A1 has been a really critical program for my department, and we've been implementing it since it passed. And of the $580 million, $425 million is set aside for new rental development, the affordable development projects. But there's also a housing preservation program and a down payment assistance program and a couple of other opportunities that we are still rolling out. The housing preservation program, which is exactly what Ms. Smith just talked about, it's funding meant to keep seniors in their homes. So homeowners who need to make critical repairs. This program is run by Habitat for Humanity. And that program, the website there is acrenew.org. And that program has currently helped 55 homeowners in Oakland stay in their homes. So we're really proud of it. It does take a long time in the sense that it's a heavy staff burden. Like you have to meet with them. You have to help someone figure out what they want to have done. You have to help them qualify for the loan that is a silent second mortgage that does not require a payment. And then you have to help them identify a contractor and then help them oversee the contractor. So we're probably got about 8 or 9 projects going at any given time across the county. And so in the last 4 years, we've been able to help 55 homeowners in Oakland. We also have a down payment assistance program because we really also see that there was a lot of disinvestment in low-income communities. And so this is that group of folks who earn between 80 and 120% of area median income. And there is a focus on folks who have been displaced from Alameda County, making it available for them to come back. The Board of Supervisors was very clearly trying to reach out to homeowners who might have lost their homes during the foreclosure crisis back in 2008 through 2010, and really wanting to find ways to identify those households and help them come back. We've just finished helping the 100th homeowner buy a new home in Alameda County. Oakland and Hayward are the 2 jurisdictions where the most homes have been purchased. The other really critical program, and it's the biggest program, is the rental development program. And so far, Alameda County has spent $112 million of that $425 million in Oakland, 15 projects, resulting in over 1,200 new affordable housing units. And so when I do say affordable, I mean affordable to 50% or below area median income. So every unit that we've invested in has been at 50% or below, and 20% of all units helped have to be at 20% of area median income. And so we actually have a real critical effort of trying to build housing that really reaches those deeper income targets. And Miss Elaine Brown's project on 7th and Campbell has about 12 million of our Measure A1 dollars. So that is definitely one of the projects that we have supported. But here's Casa Arabella. This one's up, it's finished, it is occupied, 94 affordable units in the Fruitvale, and it's got over 20 units that are for homeless households, people who are not earning much at all, and they have not just development subsidy, but they also have what we need and call operating subsidy. And the operating subsidy is what covers the cost of the difference between what they can afford to pay in rent and then what it costs to operate the building, including mortgage and maintenance and utilities and garbage and water and sewer and all of those other costs. So an operating subsidy is also critical. And there's not a lot of those operating subsidies. So we're really trying to build our investment of those. And here you can see our beloved former Supervisor Wilma Chan with Mayor Libby Schaaf. And I think it's also really critical to note that it's the partnership between the county and the city that is really getting these things done. This is Embark Apartments, 62 units. Almost 100% of this is affordable to households at 30% or below area median income. And then here we have Coliseum Connections. It's grand opening, 110 units in East Oakland, and Supervisor Miley is there with my former boss, Linda Gardner. The other really critical piece of affordable housing is that it creates jobs. And we really need to make sure these jobs are available for our own residents and the folks that really need job training. And so these are things that we're trying to do with Measure A1, is to try and leverage the funds that we have to create pathways for jobs. I don't know that we've done the best job at it, and I think we have more room to grow and do better there. But we've been able to identify over 5,000 jobs have been created with Measure A1. So Alameda County is still very deeply committed to affordable housing. It's working really, really hard on easing the homeless problems and trying to identify units that can be used and lived in by formerly homeless individuals and families. And this is a big part of our goal with this program, but it's also a big part of what we need. And here is a nice long list of all of the projects that we've done. And you can see here how much we've invested in each project and which ones are completed and which ones are in the final closeout stages. There's only one in construction right now. It's Casa Sueños at Fruitvale Transit. And I know that 7th and Campbell is going to be starting construction probably in the next month. So that one's going to be moving out of the pre-development phase. 1,200 units though. And so I'll just end there. Happy to answer any questions, but we really believe strongly here in Alameda County that housing is a human right. And we're really excited to have been able to be part of this meeting this morning.
Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Michelle, for that information. There were a few questions in the chat, I believe. So if you have that information or some links to some data that people are specifically asking for, please do that. So now we're going to shift over to Mr. William Gilchrist's office. In his stead, we have Ms. Audrey and Lakshmi, who also have a presentation for us.
Thank you, Reverend McCants. My name is Lakshmi Rajagopalan. Thank you for having us today. I am a strategic planner, a planner with the Strategic Planning Division in the Oakland Planning and Building Division, and I'm the project manager for the General Plan Update. And with me, I have Audrey Lieberworth. Audrey, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks again for inviting us to be here with you all today. I'm Audrey, and I am also a planner in the Strategic Planning Division at the City of Oakland. And yes, so happy to be here today.
So let me start sharing my screen, and we have a very quick presentation on the housing element update that the city is undertaking as part of this larger general plan update process. One second.
And this is a condensed version of our normal presentation. So we're just going to give a brief overview of the housing element, which, as based on our conversations today, seems like it's very timely and very needed. And then we will follow up at the end of this, and we can share a copy of our full presentation that goes into more details. So to give a quick background, the housing element is the city's blueprint for how we'll house all of the Oakland community at all economic levels, including low income and households with special needs. And this planning process will cover the planning period for the next 8 years. And the housing element does this by creating a set of housing programs and policies to meet our Oakland community's housing needs and identifying sites across the city where we can build housing to meet our community's needs. And the housing element is a policy document that is subject to state approval, and we update it every 8 years. And we're currently at the end of one cycle, and we will start the next cycle beginning 2023. And finally, the housing element is, a critical, it's a critical policy document because having a housing element that complies with state law allows us to be eligible for a number of grants that help benefit housing. Next slide. So this is our housing element timeline. And as you can see, we kicked off preparation and community engagement for the housing element in winter 2022. And the first draft of the housing element was available for the 30-day public review period between May 12th and June 13th, 2022. But we recognize that 30 days is a very short period of time. So we're continuing to make our public draft available through the end of September for comments and review. And we're also continuing our community engagement and presentations during this period. So any feedback we receive will certainly be incorporated into the next draft we share with the public in November 2022. Next slide. And this is a little bit more detailed look at the community outreach that we've conducted so far. So our staff and our consultants have held housing element study sessions with the Planning Commission and City Council. And we've also held a series of workshops and discussion groups with the community. But our staff and consultants are also working to prioritize engagement, specifically for communities that have been impacted by historic and continued patterns of segregation and exclusion across Oakland. And so with that in mind, we've been holding a series of more informal cultural hub events and pop-up events to meet communities where they're at. And we've had pop-up porch chats in West Oakland and pop-up cultural hub events at the Oakland Asian Cultural Center and the Black History Month celebration at Hoover Elementary School, the Black Joy Parade, Akoma Market, and more. And so in addition to that, our planning staff are we presented at over 20 neighborhood and community group presentations with a priority for those groups that are based in East and West Oakland, and we're also going to continue those presentations throughout the rest of this year. And finally, we're doing presentations at various other meetings as requested, like the one today. Next slide. So far through our community engagement, we've heard a lot of key issues. Those include that, like folks have said today on our call, families have been losing homes during the foreclosure and predatory loan crisis. I'm so sorry, I'll speak slower. Black residents and culture are being pushed out of Oakland, and evictions are happening far too often. There are also issues within the existing housing across Oakland where there's issues of overcrowding and mold and lead and water leaks and poor ventilation. There's lack of access to rental assistance, and seniors and families across Oakland can't afford housing. And for unsheltered communities in Oakland, there's limited access or no access to hygiene and shelter, and there's not enough financial assistance for food and rent. And then also we have communities that are living in polluted areas in East and West Oakland especially, and they're at high risk of health concerns. Next slide. So some of the solutions that we've heard from the community that respond directly to the key issues are that we should fund land trusts and other co-ownership opportunities across Oakland. We should establish a proactive rental inspection system and provide supportive programs and financing so that homeowners can help clean up mold in their homes so that they can also age in place. We need to build more deeply affordable housing, especially housing that's affordable for extremely low-income communities. We need to provide access to bathrooms and showers, healthcare, and supportive services for unsheltered communities. And we should also consider environmental justice and climate challenges when we're planning for housing. Next slide. So this is the final section we'll talk about today, and this is our housing action plan. And this section outlines some of the goals and policies and programs that we will implement in our housing element to address the housing needs of the Oakland community and work toward preserving, rehabilitating, and producing more housing. So the first goal is to protect Oakland residents from displacement and prevent homelessness. And we plan to do this through enforcing the just cause for eviction measures, monitoring neighborhood displacement risk factors, and continuing and expanding the tenant protection ordinance. The second goal is to preserve and improve the existing affordable housing stock. So we want to provide homeowners with support to rehabilitate their homes. We want to promote healthy homes and lead-safe housing. And we also want to provide enforcement and monitoring and so that we can preserve affordable housing covenants with an emphasis on at-risk units. Our third goal is to expand affordable housing opportunities. We want to develop permanent housing affordable to extremely low-income households on public land. We want to develop a project-based rental or operating subsidy program for extremely low-income residents. And we want to implement an affordable housing overlay. And the fourth goal is to address homelessness and expand services for the unhoused. So expanding, improving, and maintaining our crisis response beds, expanding co-governance and partnerships with unsheltered residents in the design and delivery of homelessness services. And the fifth goal is to promote neighborhood stability and health. We want to provide fair housing services and outreach, provide more first-time homebuyer programs, and encourage construction of new affordable housing in high-resource neighborhoods. Next slide. So a lot of times during our community engagement, we're asked, what is new about this housing element as opposed to past housing elements? So some of the new policies and programs that we're implementing for this new housing element cycle are creating an affordable housing overlay, creating a rental housing registry, establishing a proactive rental inspections program, establishing a rental and operating subsidy program for extremely low income residents, providing incentives and funding to help seniors and low income homeowners build accessory dwelling units to provide that second source of money so that folks can stay in age in place. And let's go to the next slide. So the next benchmarks for the housing element include, we will be sending a first draft of the housing element to the state for review at the end of June, so next week or this coming week. And then the state will review the draft housing element over the next 90-day review period. And so we expect comments from the state at the end of September 2022. And a reminder, just during that period, during that 90-day period, we will continue to be doing our community engagement, and we will still be accepting comments from the public on the draft housing element. And then we will work on incorporating those comments from the state and the public into our draft that we will then share out with the public in November 2022. And then we will have more planning commission and city council hearings. And those dates are to be determined. So you can visit our general plan update website for more information. And we can also drop a link to the housing element webpage into the chat box. And our email is also here to generalplan@oaklandca.gov in case folks want to reach out directly and ask me and Lakshmi questions. And so now I think we can open it up for some questions. It looks like there are a lot of questions.
So I'll ask that if you all can just communicate through the chat. We do have to keep it moving. But we thank you both so much for presenting and coming in Mr. William Gilchrist's stead. We understand that he is under the weather, so please let him know that he is in our prayers. Yes, you also, like I said, this is an educational kind of town hall, so we're sorry if it's kind of a sensory overload, but we will keep the agenda moving. We will next hear from Ms. Shola Olatoye, who at the beginning of this year accepted the role to be, for the city of Oakland, the new director of the Department of Housing and Community Services. So Ms. Shola, it is nice to meet you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Reverend McCants and the entire Allen AME family for inviting me to participate with my colleagues and friends in this ever important work. And one correction, Reverend, I actually joined the city in February of 2020. I had all of 3 weeks in my office before the world shut down. And so let me just say, as a newcomer to the Bay, I'm from New York City. I've spent my career in affordable housing and community development. My most recent public sector role was as chair and CEO of the New York City Housing Authority, the country's largest housing authority, where more than 400,000 people, about the population of a little bit larger than the population of Oakland, call home. So deeply affordable housing with significant funding challenges, but I have spent my my career and really my passion in working to provide and work in community to provide housing, which I believe is the foundation for opportunity. So if I also could have the opportunity to share my screen, I would welcome that. And while we're doing that, let me just say, my colleague, Bill Gilchrist, we're literally texting as we are here today. He sends his deep regrets for not being able to be with us all today. He is literally stuck in Boston because he contracted COVID while he was there. So he is unfortunately, he is doing okay, and I'm sure receives your good wishes and prayers. But as you heard, is ably represented by members of his team and my colleagues, Lakshmi and Audrey, who are doing an amazing yeoman's work in leading the housing element, which is such a critical and foundational document for how the city, not just what we have done, because that's an important part of the housing element, what we did over the course of the last 8 years, but then what we are proposing to do over the course of the next 8 years. And so it's both sort of a bit of a perspective look and also a prospective look in terms of the needs of our community today, but also over the next 8 years. So we have to, in concert with our neighbors and residents, be able to use that data and this feedback to not just think about the crisis of today, but also the crisis of the next 8 years. I don't think any of us would have predicted a global pandemic and what that meant for people's housing stability in the immediate days after February 2020. And so we've had to, as a city, as a region, as a country, pivot to serve the needs of our colleagues, so just of our neighbors. So just give me a moment as I pull this up. Hopefully you all can see that. Is that true? I'm going to go into a slideshow, so I won't be able to look at the chat, but we'll certainly pay attention at the end. I'm going to run through some of these slides pretty quickly. Many of you, I want to thank my colleague, Ms. Smith, for some of the national perspective that she provided around the data, as well as my colleague, Michelle Starratt, here at the county. I think if anything, you will hopefully take away that we don't do this work in both protecting Oakland residents, preserving existing housing and building new housing. We can't do this alone. And one of the things that I think we've not heard to date is the significant resource gap that this city has faced. And I'm sorry, I think Michelle did provide some of that national perspective about the disinvestment that the federal government has overseen over the course of the last 30 years. But we also must recognize our local need here in the city of Oakland. In May 2021, this council adopted HCD's strategic action plan, which was 2 years. That was very intentional because we believed that the resources that the voters of Oakland had put forth and supported in 2016 with Measure KK, which had $100 million for affordable housing, was a wonderful, I'll call it down payment, which is spent and in community. With more than 625 affordable units within our city. More than 30% of those are for people who are at 0 to 30% AMI. But we know that's not enough. Our plan in 2021 said that there was a $340 million local funding gap. As you heard, affordable housing is oftentimes funded with multiple sources of funding, local funding, state funding, federal funding. And so if we as a city aren't able to provide and maintain and continue to support that local contribution, we are not competitive for the county, state, and federal funds that might be available for affordable housing. Just a word, the Department of Housing and Community Development, we're the city's 5th largest department. with a budget just over a little bit over 65 million, just in terms of how we operate our programs that are within 5 different units here here for the city of Oakland: community development engagement, residential lending, housing development services, and our rent adjustment program, as well as fiscal and admin. I'm going to blow through these pretty quickly. Part of the key component of our strategic action plan was a racial equity lens. We've heard about the disproportionate impact of not only sort of broader economic real estate market pressures on the Black community in particular here in the city of Oakland. And so what does that mean for our work? For us, it meant sort of threefold. One, targeting resources at to the most vulnerable, specifically those folks at that 0 to 30%, and those folks who have been historically impacted by racial inequity here in the city. It meant in order to fix it, you got to be able to measure it. So we as a department have worked really and continue to work to transparently, honestly put forth and report out on the data of who we are serving and, frankly, who we are not serving. And then we've heard from so many Oakland residents, not only in the housing element conversations, but in our own engagement work, about the continued obstacles that BIPOC developers and community leaders face when trying to themselves do this type of work as a partner within the city. So those are the 3. That's the lens in which we look at our work. I won't sort of spend a ton of time on the importance of data to help us identify where we can focus our resources. We don't have the resources of San Francisco. We don't have the resources of some similarly sized cities. And so it was super important for me as a newcomer, but also I think for the city, to understand where should we be focusing our resources. And we've partnered with Stanford as well as UPenn. And I think someone actually sourced some of our earlier data. It's not a surprise for folks who know where the need is, where the large numbers of housing unstable residents exist. Right, it's in parts of East Oakland, parts of West Oakland, and while this data is really from June 2020, we've seen this data, that dark area, get even darker as residents have increasingly. Income unstable residents have moved to more income unstable neighborhoods in the last 2 years. We did a survey in 2021 of renters and landlords, really trying to understand how people were experiencing the pandemic as it related to their housing. And again, you can see sort of folks' inability, where people are with their who are unable to pay their rent. We'll talk about the RENA. I think my colleagues from planning talked about how important the housing element is really our charge is driven by the regional housing needs allocation, which basically tells cities this is the amount of housing by income that you must produce. We'll go into a little bit about how we've done and where those gaps are. Our work takes that racial equity lens at the center and really focuses on 6 needs, and you can see that here. Of course, we'll make this available for you to have after today's conversation. Like a lot of our colleagues, we've really tried to organize our work, our thinking, our resources within kind of a framework of the 3P approach. That might be something you all have heard: protection, preservation, and production. It is also the framework of the Housing Action Plan that Lakshmi and Audrey referenced as part of the housing element. And what it means specifically, and I'm going to highlight just a couple of programs within each of those 3 Ps. Protection, and I'm sorry, this is not presenting as well as I'd like it to be, but for protection, Oakland had the first and frankly the strongest moratorium in March of 2020 after at the beginning of the pandemic. Residents would not be evicted for non-payment of rent. And with that, the federal government has put out more than $25 billion across the country to support emergency rental assistance. You heard from my colleague at the county what they have done in working to support residents of Alameda County. Oakland's leadership decided to run its program. While these numbers are from early May, we have it. Not surprising, we have had a huge demand for emergency rental assistance, and with more than, so to date, we've served over 3,000 households with an average of $10,000 each. And we have a wait list of more than 4,500 people who have yet to be served as we wait for additional funding. So our protection work over the course of the last year has been, frankly, buttressed, and supported by that eviction moratorium, which is complicated and has had lots of different impacts in communities. And it has also supported keeping residents in place and therefore not adding to households that may lose their housing and ultimately end up on the street. I will also say our rent adjustment program, which manages and really governs the more than 60,000 units that fall within the rent adjustment program, has made huge strides to work with property owners and renters for folks to know their rights, to ask before they act. And that is a huge component of our protection work. And you heard some of the things that are to come over the course of the next couple of years as part of the housing element. As part of our emergency rental assistance, you can see actually this number has gone up in terms of the folks that have actually received dollars. More than 3,000 households and almost close to $30 million has been put back into trying to keep people homes and housed, and supporting the property owners that have had also significant impacts during the COVID this pandemic. You can see where the majority of our funds have gone. We're looking at the flatlands, and you can see those zip codes. A lot of work to ensure that the folks who were actually assisted reflected, and frankly, even more so, targeted at the most impacted residents. And you can see more than 50, almost close to 50% of folks who were assisted were Black, and so on throughout in terms of the rest of the community. Our program, unlike many, targeted specifically people who were at that 0 to 30% AMI. So while the program, one is eligible, if you are up to 80%, we really worked to target our outreach, target our information to residents that were at the lowest end of the income scale, and it has borne fruit in that those are the families that we have been able to assist. Quickly moving on to the second P within our preservation work, the city does have a down payment assistance program, and it has been supported by the state of California up until 2020. And this program, there was an award from the state in 2017 that then was completed in 2020. And we've not been able to get additional resources from the state to support this important need, which is helping to support new homeowners here in Oakland. And I will say this is a real one of those areas where Oakland, we are both hurt by the fact that we are in a high cost area, and that the cost to purchase a home is so high. And so therefore, the reality of the market actually continues to have a disproportionate impact on those folks who are trying to get that first home. So I want to thank some of our council members who I know who are here, who've actually sought to put resources in the upcoming budget for more down payment assistance and resources to support existing homeowners. Oakland has a long-time home management improvement program that provides up to $175,000 in a forgivable loan, effectively, for existing Oakland homeowners to do everything from insert grab bars to doing larger kind of rehab needs. Someone mentioned the importance of community land trusts in both acquiring and keeping existing units affordable, a really important tool in the suite of how we address our housing crisis. And we, with the support of many of the city leaders and in direct investment, have worked closely with all of our land trust partners, and as well as looking to see if there is a real path for existing low and moderate income homeowners to legalize and build new accessory dwelling units, which is something that we will hopefully bring to the market this fall. Other quick highlights, a lot of focus on how do we add more housing for people at that, again, who are experiencing homelessness or at that incredibly very low income part of the income scale. The state launched what has now been acknowledged as a very innovative program to acquire and convert motels and hotels for permanent housing. Oakland, we won 3 awards in 2021, creating in less than 9 months. And I'll just pause to say in less than 9 months, because typically a project will take 3 to 5 years and sometimes longer. But in less than 9 months, we created 166 permanent new units of affordable housing within the city of Oakland. Just earlier this year, we were awarded 2 additional awards with another $30 million that will bring on approximately doing the math, approximately 60 new units of housing for people who are experiencing homelessness. And there will be another round of Home Key later this fall. This is just a highlight of one of those projects that has become quite the national sort of the national darling, as we converted the old CCA dorm up on Broadway. And now that is home to not only families who are experiencing homelessness, but also 42 permanent housing units for Oakland seniors. So it's with on-site services, and it's a really wonderful model, and we need and want to do more. Our production highlight: these are new units to the market.
Shola, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can conclude and just say there's a lot to be done. And this, I think, is actually a really great slide to end on, because you can see the work that the city has done with the resources that it's been given over the course of 2021. And there is so much more to be done. And I will just add 2 last things, which is to say there is an opportunity for another bond issuance to support affordable housing here in the city of Oakland. And that will be, I won't say the only way, but it's really the only way at this point that the city has a shot at trying to create the type of housing that residents are so desperately asking for. And so with that, I am so pleased to have been with you today and look forward to the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I didn't want to cut you off. This is such good information, and the way that you're presenting it is awesome. But yeah, we definitely have to hear from our elected officials. But of course, if you have anything to share, Shola, please add it to the chat so that people have access. Thank you again. This has been marvelous. And so now we will segue into definitely people who are not strangers to us, to Oakland, to our elected officials. We have Supervisor Nate Miley, Councilmembers Carroll, Fife, Loren Taylor, and I believe Treva Reid, if she is still on or is on. I know she had a hard stop. Okay, I think she's on. So to round us out, we are going to hear from our elected officials, and we've already, kind of sent them what we wanted them to kind of share with us. So the question on the table is, what have you as an elected official done, or what are you doing or plan to do to address housing issues? And we can speak directly to Black folks. We've heard the numbers that Black folks within the Bay Area numbers are plummeting, and that in light of Oakland being 23% Black, but however, we make up 70% of the unhoused, unsheltered community. What are you doing? What have you done that is speaking to that? So, Councilmember Reid, I will let you go first. I know that you on the clock, and we'll give you 3 minutes if that's doable. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope to be able to share, and I can stay a little bit longer as well. So my 3 minutes might add into some Q&A. But we certainly have heard a lot of the information from the beginning of this discussion to just now with those updates from the county, the severity of where we are with this housing crisis and the impact that it is on Black Oaklanders. I think the latest census data actually shows that we're now 20% of the population, and certainly the last data has shown that we represent 70% of those who are homeless and the greatest percent of those who are renters with the lowest wages and incomes to really support and sustain ourselves. I'll share the one thing that I'll lead out with because it's really timely is that this coming Monday, a group of us with the Bay Area Black Housing Advisory Task Force known as Black Hat have requested $500 million in state investments to launch a 9-county Bay Area regional housing fund that will create just a virtuous cycle of development focused on capacity building, housing production, and community planning within our area where Oakland has had Black neighbors displaced at a rate of 40% within the region. And so I want to invite you, and we'll put in the chat that press conference details for the 27th and our call to our state leaders to join us in delivering more equitable funding beyond that, which we've advocated for at the city and the county through this specific targeted effort to deliver funding for the Black community. Coming into this council seat, we certainly realize that where I represent in deep East Oakland is an area of our city that has the largest percent of Black Oaklanders. We have the most highly impacted zip codes and census tracts, the highest rates of COVID diagnosis, death, hospitalization, those who within our community have lost their jobs, whose businesses have been closed, and who've not been able to keep up with rent, mortgage payments, or utility to keep them housed and to maintain that generational wealth equity that we don't have and certainly have long deserved. So there are a number of things that I can speak to that include some of the work that I've supported or led out on. One of those first opportunities was seeding funds from our Oakland Coliseum Joint Power Authority to allow the city to establish hotel residency. And that was through the Federal Emergency Fund, the FEMA reimbursement. And that helped to provide housing for our houseless community members. Early on, participated in groundbreaking of deeply affordable housing development on 95th and International. This project was a 55-unit, deeply affordable mixed unit development with a community serving a health clinic in this development with La Clinica, and it came under a $28 million program called Better Neighborhoods, Same Neighborhoods, which is a community-driven led program that may have strong representation here on the work that they led to ensure that $30 million was invested in partnership with Act Sirens for that opening. I've supported the launch and funding for our Lau Family Community Development Care Center, which is located on Eads. It used to be the Motel 6. This site offers 150 subsidized units, re-entry, wraparound resources, navigation support in partnership with a number of organizations, including workforce readiness organizations, including our health partner, Roots Community Health Center, serving primarily Black unhoused community members coming into housing and those who are formerly incarcerated. I've supported seeding additional funding for the development of our tiny home villages and included a mid-cycle budget request coming before council for additional transitional youth housing for the site that we have on Hagenberger now for 18 to 25-year-olds, with a second phase hoping to be supported by council. We certainly heard from our directors around securing home key funding. Well, we were able to secure home key funding for Clara and Eads. This site is across from the East Oakland Senior Center, and we will work to build up senior housing, 200 to 300 housing units based on the type of housing that's built there. We're looking at a modular home model there. Supported the TRIO housing for teachers to be afforded in housing, supported our safe RV site for those who are in transition to housing at 66th Avenue. And we have some additional funds in the mid-cycle budget that we are proposing to help meet the $1.2 million gap that we've put forth. Shola has shared about a number of the funds that we've supported and advocated through the city, $215 million from the California Department of Housing. We recently received a $2 million grant with a press conference this last week. I've certainly supported down payment assistance programs for homeowners to have funding to keep also our seniors and our Black legacy owners in their homes. I bought my first home through a deeply affordable home ownership program with down payment assistance, with no PMI, with a 10-year tax abatement, and understand the value of how that type of a program and those programs can help to bring stability and generational wealth equity into our community. I work alongside our associated real property brokers and those members to really talk about other ways that we can advance home ownership and resources for tenants, working to invest more in our Town Connect program, which is a mortgage assistance program, working to do more educating on tenants moving from renting into home ownership and having programs that actually fund that, and ways that we can reduce the city's transfer tax for first-time buyers. I've supported recently our rent registry, progressing our 3% rent cap so that it did not escalate to 6.7%. I'm a renter now. My rent went up over 8%. I feel the weight of the impact that we are experiencing in this market and had to pray and consider how I would even meet that increase for myself. Our mid-cycle budget also, I shared, will include some funding for our youth housing, funding for safe recreational vehicle housing, funding to support having a homeless department technical support to ensure that we have the assistance, the analysis between our homeless department, our city administration, our human services department. A number of other things that I've worked to do. I don't know where I'm at with time, but I will say beyond those housing specific, and I can tell you that there are a number of things: supporting our land use policy, supporting our Oakland housing trust that's been missing, supporting converting vacant buildings and underutilized hotels. And as we're going through this general plan, ensuring that any barriers that will reduce us being able to think more creatively with how and where we zone to uplift more deeply affordable housing, like we've also done at the BART, and that funding that's come through bond measures for Coliseum Connections that was mentioned, and Coliseum Place that was just open, auditing existing revenue streams to ensure that the funds that have been voted or approved are really working to alleviate homelessness and where and how we're spending that fund. But I think the other part that we haven't talked about is about the income. We talk about the housing and we don't often talk about the resilience that's needed in our community members being able to stay in those affordable homes. And so there are a number of things that I'm working on or I have supported to address the racial wealth gap, the pay gap for women, and promoting economic security for middle and low income Oaklanders, from Oakland resilient families to a number of budget requests that I have, not just for adults, but for our youth to begin a pipeline of workforce readiness to be sustained from one generation to the next in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Reid. Councilmember Carroll, Fife.
Well, what kind of order is this?
I'm a Southern gent. Yeah, I'm a Southern gent. So I'm ladies first. That's on me. Yeah.
Well, it is definitely a pleasure being here. It's a pleasure, seeing so many familiar faces and especially on a topic that is so close to my heart. I know a lot of people probably know me from my housing activism and my housing work. For 4 years, I worked as the director at the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, where I had the pleasure of working with Jeremy McCants and our Black Housing Union. We were the first organization to even do a car caravan around the very issue of lack of supports for unsheltered Black folks during COVID. And honestly, 2 minutes does not do me justice with all of the things that I've done. I personally have spearheaded around housing. But I can say that I definitely was part of putting Oakland on the map to make housing a human right, even a common refrain for the city of Oakland with the occupation of the Magnolia House at 2928 Magnolia in West Oakland with Moms for Housing. I brought together a group of homeless women, all of whom reached out to me with varying levels of trauma from experiencing homelessness. And they gave me the courage to actually talk about my own challenges and bouts with homelessness. And out of that, we created not just a transitional space for unsheltered women with being able to purchase that home with the cooperation and participation of the Oakland Community Land Trust, but we also spearheaded ACA 10, which was a constitutional amendment to make housing a human right for the state of California, which also gave rise to Nancy Skinner's Senate Bill 1079 to regulate the ability of corporations to speculate in the state of California. And so putting regulations around speculators, because the reality is that much of what we see with our housing challenges, from homelessness to affordability, is the fact that REITs and corporate owners are coming in and buying up large swaths of single family homes and pushing up the cost of housing for all of us. And I think it's like 25% of the single family housing stock in the United States, and rising, is owned by these corporate speculators who are not interested in housing for anyone. They're interested in maximizing the profits for their shareholders. And so that's an area that I think it's really important for us to organize around in the city of Oakland, in the state of California, and nationally, quite frankly, is around how do we bring together the individuals who are trying to provide housing as small housing providers and tenants to create some regulations around these corporate stakeholders who are making it challenging for everyone and driving up the cost of housing. So I personally believe that the way we do housing in America and globally is just wrong. When you have housing as a financial device, it inherently is going to create problems for people who do not have access to finances. And that historically in this country has been Black people. So if we look at housing with the same lens that we've always approached it with, we will always have problems, and we will continue to see what we're experiencing today. Whereas one of the earlier speakers said, there is no county in the United States of America where an individual making minimum wage can afford a 2-bedroom apartment. And that is not by accident, which also increases segregation, it increases poverty, and all of the issues that come along with that. So once again, we don't have enough time in this meeting today to talk about all of the things that I've spearheaded, started, organized around how to support housing for Black folks. But what I will say is that I have ballot initiatives this fall that will be in front of you around social housing, around developing additional units for acquisition or construction that will be affordable to people. I have been on the body to put forward another tranche of Measure KK, so that'll be in front of voters as well to allow us to develop additional units. But we have to understand that the majority of units that are available to the majority of renters here are units that are 25 and below. So the largest percentage of affordable housing stock for Oakland residents is in units that are 25 units and below. And that's not an area that larger affordable housing developers really pay attention to. I've talked to affordable housing developers that say we don't get out of bed for anything less than 50 or 100 units is better. So there's so many layers and complications to this issue that it's going to take all of us working together to figure out solutions. I've stood up an emergency homeless intervention in my district that is 90% Black, which is probably one of the most, if not the most humane space for unsheltered people in the city of Oakland. And it's been a fight for me to get that done. And it's because we are stuck with the status quo. And once we are able to acknowledge that what we're doing has been wrong from day one, then we can come with creative solutions for how to address that. And I will wrap it up because you're getting me going on a topic I really care about. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop, Jeremy. And I appreciate the opportunity to do that.
And we thank you for your fearlessness of all you all. So just thank you, Councilmember Fife, for sharing and for all you've done. So I will now kick it to Councilmember Taylor to share with us.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy, thank you to all who have helped to organize this event, and Alan Temple and other hosts. I want to begin by just acknowledging the city and county department leaders and staff who have been working hard to really make sure that we not only envision a strategy, but really start to execute and deliver on that. So Michelle Starratt, Bill Gilchrist, Shola Olatoye, and your entire teams. For me, it is, what we're talking about is deeply personal because I am a third generation Oaklander, a product of the town. When my grandparents moved here to Oakland from Louisiana and Mississippi, they first landed at Harbor Homes, government housing that's currently, that was on land that is currently occupied by the port today. And so they were able to move from public housing to home ownership, addressing a lot of what we've talked about in terms of the hopes and the aspirations for our community today. And we know that that is much further out of reach for so many in the Black community and in the Bay Area in general. I think it's important to sort of anchor to that statement that I think it was Michelle that brought, that no county in the US allows a minimum wage job to cover your rent. Like, that is ridiculous in and of itself. And it's even more exacerbated in a high cost, high rent location like the Bay Area. So we've got significant challenges ahead of us. I'm grateful for the partnerships that I've been able to form and build over the past, my time, almost 4 years on the council, working with organizations to deliver solutions across the continuum from protection to production and preservation. Partners like, Elaine Brown have to acknowledge the work that she has done and the model that she is establishing, not just in terms of developing a housing unit that is intentionally focused on very low and extremely low income, but by the way that she's doing it, which is a way that I think we need to take into example. And I've been sort of advocating is really making sure that our local minority, specifically Black contractors and developers have a seat at the table and are able to create jobs, create income as a result of that. We have to look at what we're doing as a way of uplifting the incomes of our residents in addition to building and creating the housing. My past actions, you asked like what we've been doing, what I've been up to. And so, yes, we do want to just acknowledge that as a council member on the council, leading the Life Enrichment Committee that's been focused on addressing homelessness and housing, serving on the Community and Economic Development Committee that's been guiding development projects. I'm grateful to have been able to lead the council in establishing the PATH plan, permanent access to housing, that focuses on how we're addressing homelessness from prevention to crisis response, transitional housing, and long-term supportive housing, a strategy that had not existed before that the council did unanimously adopt under my leadership as the Life Enrichment Committee chair. Also advocating for things on the housing side, like homeownership side, like probate reform, making that a legislative priority so that we can ensure that we do have wealth transfer within our community. Advocating since day one for things that address homeowners staying in their homes as well, like the down payment assistance programs, homeowner displacement resources, incorporating that into policies that when initially introduced were heavily, primarily focused on tenants and making sure that we had Black homeowners in mind as well. Looking at the loan programs that we were able to fund through the CARES Act, the budget that I was able to bring forward, along with my colleagues on the council, supporting proposals for additional affordable housing. In District 6, I'm proud to have more than 800 units of affordable housing, averaging 50% and lower in my district as a result of the work that we've been doing. And that includes projects like the Liberation Park development in partnership with the Black Cultural Zone, supporting the development of the Edward Shands project that's bringing affordable housing. We've got Genesis work with Genesis Worship Center, a Black church in my district in terms of building affordable housing on their parking lot and other models of development as well. Similarly, co-authoring legislation that allows access for additional models like hosting RVs on property here in Oakland that was not allowed before with current legislation. When we talk about, and there's more, I think I agree with Councilmember Fife, we don't have time to go into all of the things that we've been working on, advocating, at least that I've been working on and advocating for, and really driving with investments of the, with all of the investments that we've had. I think to focus on what we need to do and how we move forward, I think it is important to call out the fact that the root of the housing affordability crisis and the lack of access that we face is racism. We can't get away from that. We have to call it what it is. And that means that the solutions we bring have to be intentionally focused on countering and addressing racism. And that's why I'm grateful that Director Olatoye really highlighted how we are disaggregating the data to understand how our policies, how the investments, how other aspects of our solutions are directly affecting specific demographic groups, Black people versus brown people versus others, so that we can ensure that we're getting the outcomes that we invest in and that we're working towards. That includes aspects of addressing high costs. So the contractor development programs that we have to invest in to support minority contractors, increasing the coordination between different levels of government and the focus on equity, addressing housing preservation. I think it's important. We did talk about the need for land trusts. I think it's also important that we, as a city, take advantage of the opportunity to pull properties off the market, do our own land banking for the benefit of community, as opposed to simply allowing the market to do what it will, and then us simply trying to keep up and then try and protect our residents, those who are vulnerable and housing insecure from there. I think it's also important that we acknowledge the need to have long-term affordability. I think Ms. Dillard-Smith spoke to that. There have been policies that have crossed our desk, the dais, that have only required 30 years of affordability in order to get funding from the city. I specifically advocated to change the legislation and to change the contracts to ensure that we had a minimum of 55 years, if not more, of affordability locked in through the deed restrictions that are there. Rental housing versus ownership, I do think that that's a false choice. We have to acknowledge that we have to focus on both in terms of solutions, because the housing affordability crisis is so stark, and we need all solutions on deck. We need to support people getting housed and having that stability, at the same time focus on the longer term wealth generation, wealth creation, and intergenerational wealth transfer for the Black community. I know I'm going on. I can't touch on everything. I guess what I'll land on is that partnership is key. Integrating in how we work together. I'm grateful to have served on the ABAG, Association of Bay Area Governments, representing the city as we've been addressing housing policies and how we collaborate across boundaries and jurisdictions in the 9 Bay Area County. Also working in partnership with my peers at the county level in neighboring cities to ensure that we are coordinated and working together, because we can't do it alone. We have to advocate more strongly. And when we have a cohesive plan, as we've seen with the All Home plan, we are able to advocate for more resources that will come to our area and therefore to Oakland. So that's important as well. And there's more information that you can find on, my website, social media channels, in terms of things that I've been involved in. But I will just end there with a deep commitment to making sure that we get this right, not just for today's generation, which we actually absolutely have to do, but for my son and daughter who will be raising their sons and daughters here in the town. And that's my focus. I think we should continue to stay focused on that, not just the immediate, but the long term as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Taylor. And yeah, there's always a steady vision to create a world that we may not live to see. That's always the goal. So now to close us out, we will hear from our Supervisor, Nate Miley, if he is on.
Yeah, thanks so very much. And I apologize. I know I have to be somewhere else at 1:45. So I'm going to try to hit some points rapidly and pick up on a few themes that I've already heard throughout the course of the meeting today. So Michelle Sterott has already pointed out some of the work that the county's been doing around affordability and to support Oakland and African Americans. We've put about $112 million into 15 projects in the city of Oakland. And Michelle kind of gave you a list of those, but also through our AC Housing Secure, we're trying to prevent anti-displacement program, and we fund this eviction defense fund through not just Oakland, but throughout the entire county. And so that's another thing we've been up to as well. And it's provided about support for 1,200 renters annually since its inception. Additionally, I think Loren just hit on it. The county has approved another 5-year plan talking about $2.5 billion to address homelessness throughout the county. Clearly, a healthy portion of that would be allocated to Oakland, since that's where a lot of the homeless issues are, homeless unsheltered population are. There are, Treva kind of mentioned the hotels. Two of the hotels that the county purchased are in my district, the Days Inn and Comfort Inn. We are providing home housing for the unsheltered there, and we are working to set up a permanent supportive housing as well through those properties that would remain affordable and available for low income and very low income for the next 55 years. Measure A1 was county housing bond, $600 million. I've already begun talking with our housing staff and the Board of Supervisors that we need to go out for another bond measure, because the issue of affordable housing, it's not going away, and we need more resources. It's not just an issue of supply. Obviously, it's a concern about affordability. It's a concern about permitting. It's a concern about pricing. It's a concern about quality of life. There are a lot of factors that look at that, but clearly we need additional resources to build more affordable housing. So the county's going to begin to explore another bond measure in the near future. I worked with Supervisor Warren on that, and Supervisor Carson. There's some things that we've also done through my office, working with Supervisor Carson to support the Bay Area Community Benefit Organization, so that we can work with the faith-based community to provide opportunities for the faith-based community. And Loren hit on that with Genesis as a good example, to try to provide more housing at underutilized properties that the faith community have. Tried to look at the school district. The school district has a lot of surplus property. I just have been very careful not to push the school district what they might want to do with their surplus property, but any surplus property the school district has, wanting to partner with them on additional affordable housing, because there is that property that's existed in the past. And I'm not getting into the present controversy about school closures, but looking at all the surplus property that presently has. The county has a countywide eviction moratorium, which I abstained on. It's been in place now, and I think it, quite frankly, is causing more harm than good at this point in time, because it's not COVID, and it's preventing a lot of small mom and pop landlords who are African American, who are retirees and seniors, from controlling their property and dealing with tenants who are not good tenants. Because you can have bad landlords and you can have bad tenants. And in this case, I think, I'm not talking about the city eviction moratorium, the county's eviction moratorium, I think is causing more harm than good at this point in time. And I'd like to see it either modified or repealed. Additionally, when we talk about affordable housing, we just can't look at housing and funding for those matters. We have to also look at the population. I do think there are a lot of people who are unsheltered because they're mentally ill. And I, for one, want to get the mentally ill people off the streets. I'm a big proponent of compulsory mandatory treatment for mentally ill. So trying to push our behavioral health department to get more community-based mental health facilities in place, working with the African-American community on an African-American health hub that would provide more than just health services, because health is a broad concept, because we need to get the folks who are mentally ill off the streets. And if they don't want to get off the streets voluntarily, then there's got to be a way of mandating that, and then getting them into treatment, a treatment plan, because I support the Governor's Care Corps, getting them into a 2-year treatment plan, getting them housed, getting them back to stability, I think is another important thing. And a lot of the folks, once again, who statistics point out, who are unsheltered, who are mentally ill, are African-American and male, for that matter. And a number of them are in the city of Oakland. Loren hit on this, and I just want to co-sign it, working with contractors, developers. Treva mentioned the Association of Real Property Brokers, working with all of our Black folks to help build wealth. That's extremely important to me, and I've always pushed for contracts for Black developers, Black vendors, everything I can do creatively within the law to ensure that Black folks are getting contracts through county government. And then finally, I would just say that the other thing that I'm pushing for and head up through the county is our efforts around reparations. We're still putting together a countywide reparation plan, been working and following the work of the state task force on reparations and seeing how the county can fit into whatever mechanisms the state begins to unfold. And we've looked at reparations efforts throughout the country, and we're continuing to see how we can shape a local reparations plan in Alameda County, which would help to benefit African Americans. So those are some of the things. I'm very succinct, but I appreciate the opportunity to be here for this forum today. So thank you so very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Supervisor Miley. Thank you for making time for us and for sharing. Councilmember, I see your hand up.
If I can go really quickly, the reparations came up, and I did want to acknowledge that we are introducing the Emerald New Deal, which will hopefully become a ballot measure charter amendment. It is intended to take the $8 million plus in cannabis tax revenue and restrict that towards addressing the harm caused by the war on drugs. Not slavery reparations, but reparations from direct attacks on the Black community. More than 80% of those who, almost 80% of those who were incarcerated in the 20 years, 95 to 2015, were Black, those who were incarcerated due to marijuana offenses. And so we know the devastating harm that has, and a portion of that is going to go towards housing access. So wanted to acknowledge that, and Councilmember Treva Reid as a co-sponsor of that is coming forward, and we're hoping to move the needle there as well. Thank you. Beautiful.
Yeah, see, it's a wealth of things that we can discuss, and hopefully we can we'll circle back around this topic as time moves on. But Allen Temple, the public ministry, we have been intentional about just educating, bringing people together to build shared analysis and a shared agenda for how we can move forward. So we are so grateful. I see that Dr. Allie Whitehurst, our co-chair, was able to join to our public ministry, to Allen Temple, our pastor, the Reverend Dr. Jacqueline A. Thompson, in her absence. We just thank you all for always supporting us, and for elected officials, directors. Thank you all so much for bringing us this information, and hopefully we can come together and continue to manifest the kingdom of God here on earth, and really make this place better for future generations. So as we close, I put in the chat as well that there will be a survey once you log off. We ask that you please complete that. And for those who have registered, we will have the recording available maybe early next week. Should be early next week. If you don't get the recording, it should be available on our Allen Temple Baptist Church channels. Thank you so much. And of course, like I said, we're faith-based, we're a church. So we're going to close out in prayer, and none other than the Reverend Dr. George Cummings, Senior Pastor of Imani Community Church, and the Executive Director of Faith in Action East Bay. I had to give you a little intro. But we appreciate your vision. And we ask now that you close us in prayer.
Thank you, Reverend McCanns. I will be praying in my own faith tradition. as we close out this wonderful town hall. Dear God, the God of all people, the God of all faiths, the God of all races, the God of all languages, the God of all people. We are grateful for the vision of the Allen Temple Public Ministry team and the Allen Temple Baptist Church in putting on this town hall that affirms the fact that housing is a human right. God, we are grateful that the cause of justice and the cause of liberation is at the center of this work, that they are not abstractions, but that they are concerning people who are real people who have real needs in our communities. And God, because we know that your word teaches us that except the Lord build a house, they who labor in vain, we ask you, God, to go before us. Grant us your presence, grant us your power, and grant us your wisdom as all of these public officials and brothers and sisters who are committed to the people put our heads together so that we can address one of the most troubling challenges of our time in a state that is one of the wealthiest states in America. God, we pray that you would always ensure that economic equity and racial equity is at the center of our work. And we are grateful for the opportunity on this day to get a lot of good information that will help us move forward this agenda. In the very many names by which you are known, we pray. Amen and ashe.
Amen and ashe. Thank you all again. Have a beautiful day. Get some of the sunlight. And as I always say, get you some good to eat. Until next time, God bless.